I rang Nightstop and
That's
said
right,
I'd really like to be a host, and the person on the other end said, "Have you spoken to your husband?" I said, "Oops, no, not really." And so we did that, and Nigel agreed. We then applied to do the training. We had a very, very good training day, which was excellent, wasn't
Yes.
it? Where other hosts come that are already hosts, and we got to know the team. And that's how it started.
Yeah. The first guest who came through the door was not the least what we expected, because with the best will in the world, you have a mental picture of people who are homeless.
Yeah.
This young man turned out to be a philosophy student, extremely articulate, intelligent man. We had a very nice meal together and very stimulating conversation, as you might expect from a philosophy student. We went out and picked some raspberries. I mean, I think it has to be said that was a bit of an exception, but it's interesting that the first one was like that. Well, it was the last thing in the world we expected.
We've been very, very, I think probably surprised actually how polite, how it's not about being grateful, because that's not why we do it, but polite, respectful. All the young people have been, without exception.
The thing that's opened our eyes, I mean, I like to think our eyes weren't closed before we started this, but they've certainly been opened a lot more. Just the sort of awful situations that some of these folk have lived through. We are reassured that actually, just one night or 2 or 3 nights provided by different hosts does enable the person to get moving on, and while something more permanent can be
and not sleeping rough that night.
Well, that's right. And also, I think, without sort of being too pious about it, I think the young person has experienced some sort of act of kindness in what to them has often been a very unkind world.
If you are worried as a single woman about having young men in the house, which is a perfectly normal reaction, and I have to say, I mean, I'm married and Nigel is always here when we have guests, but I was worried because it's unpredictable and we don't know. But I have to say that there is a very, very in-depth risk assessment before the young people come to us. And we can ask questions, we can say, no, I'd rather not have that person, just on what you hear. So there's a lot of very good work done behind the scenes. So it's important to look into it in more detail, even if your answer at the end is going to be no.
Yes, I mean, I'd say to, I think anybody, and I have said it, don't be frightened of it. Because as I think we were saying earlier, inevitably you come in with preconceived baggage about, what a homeless person is like. And I mean, okay, maybe sometimes it is like that. More often than not, it isn't.
The next young person I had the chance to interview was Luann.
I stayed at Nightstop for about five nights. Nigel and Imogen for 3 nights, and 2 other couples.
And Nigel and Imogen were good to you?
Yeah, they were very good. They actually gave me bus fare and stuff, like to get back in, and took me I had to meet someone, and they took me there instead of back into town when they didn't have to and stuff.
What did you think about the service Nightstop provided?
It's really good. They were lovely people that you went to stay with, and they really made you feel like it was your sort of home, even though it wasn't, but they made you feel like it was your home. And I did originally a year ago live in the YMCA, and then I got with a boy in the YMCA, and he ended up being kicked out, and I actually left with him, which was silly now thinking back, but I left with him, and we ended up moving into a flat together, and he actually ended up being quite violent towards me, and I had to have the police involved and stuff. And he did have bail conditions not to come back to the flat and stuff, but I did end up still being with him because I still loved him and stuff. And then because he turned all my family against me, and that when we actually did split up, I had nowhere to go. So I went to we had Nightstop through the Yes Centre for 5 nights. Nightstop is a very good organisation, but you still not as yourself being homeless, because it depends on whether there's hosts available and stuff. It's still really nerve-wracking and stressful to think, well, could I have a bed for tonight? I may not have a bed.
Will you be staying at the YMCA for the sort of foreseeable future? Or?
Well, it's 2 years you can stay there, and then they help you move on to other places. So yeah, I want to not get in with a boy this time.
But before our interview ended, Luann did have one final thing she wanted to mention.
I did go to the council actually this time because of the domestic violence, and I had the police involved and stuff, but they didn't help me whatsoever. They just gave me a number to ring the Women's Refuge, and at the time I was scared.
In fact, throughout filming this documentary, several people mentioned the council and governmental policies on homelessness, generally having had a fairly negative experience. Armed with these first-hand accounts, and in the spirit of representing the full picture, I arranged a meeting with Chris Hancock, the Housing Needs Manager at Exeter City Council.
We part fund Nightstop directly from money that we receive from central government to help prevent homelessness in the city. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's a real testament to the good work that the guys have done at Nightstop in terms of the training that they've given to the host families. That gives them reassurance that they can cope with potentially challenging behaviour and risks and what have you. So it's a real testament to all of their good work that that's actually worked out.
I wanted to ask about the funding the government gives you.
Yeah.
Particularly the fact that, as it's my understanding, and it may be wrong, but the more homeless people you have, the less funding you get. I mean, how do you count the people on the streets, and
Sure.
What about all the hidden homelessness?
Absolutely, and it's in a way you're right. In a way, if we suddenly had an escalation of street homelessness in Exeter, then the government would be looking at our grant money that we receive, and they'd be saying, well, you're obviously not spending it the right way. So rather than taking it all away, they would probably come and work with us and say, right, you maybe need to be spending it in a slightly different way. We do have in Exeter a relatively high number of rough sleepers. Our last street count had 15 rough sleepers.
When they do the counts, you have to be
lie.
lying down in a sleeping bag. You can't be sat up or stood up, and it has to be within a certain time during the evening to be part of the count.
You just go up to some pet shops in the morning and you can count more than 9.
I know more than 9 by name, to be honest. Just before I was homeless anyway, I knew more than 9 by name just from talking to people on the street.
In November alone, we had 46 bed nights and 70 referrals.
I think it's wrong as well that the age that they kind of say that your priority is under 18. I think it should be higher, because even though you're over 18 in your class as an adult, you still are you still don't know what you're doing and a bit vulnerable still, and I think it should be higher the age limit.
The legislation will say that if you're 16 or 17 and you're automatically in what's called priority need, and we'd automatically have a duty to accommodate you. If you fall outside of the categories or you're not vulnerable for any other reason, we can't provide accommodation there and then. But that doesn't mean that we stop talking to you. That's where we can try and get you on a list to get into accommodation. Obviously, Nightstop runs up to 25, and so we could look at Nightstop placement for someone who's over 18. The supported accommodation in the city, the YMCA, the Foyer, the Hennis Project, we have quite a range for young people. They all go up beyond 18.
I went to the council and they wouldn't give me anything because they said I would make myself intentionally homeless because I wouldn't pay my rent, so I got kicked out. Homelessness
can happen to absolutely everyone, and especially with the current economic situation, we're seeing people who possibly would never have thought of coming and speaking to the council to help them, people who are in mortgage difficulties and so on, who we really want to contact us early, because that's what's key. It's not all about providing emergency accommodation, it's about us preventing homelessness and helping people stay in their homes. We have about 6,000 households on the housing register, so all of those 6,000 households think that they have a reason to move. And who are we to argue? But we have probably 500 properties that come available every year. So we do have to have criteria, we do have to prioritise people, and we can only, unfortunately, help those people in the most need with social housing.
Despite what I'd heard about the council, Chris seemed genuine about wanting to help Exeter's homeless population. And it seemed I wasn't the only one who'd come to this conclusion.
To be perfectly frank about it, I had formed an opinion, which a lot of people have, that everybody in council housing departments are cynical, rather negative, rather demotivated. Well, that wasn't my experience of these people. I was very impressed.